In ancient times, in a vast and green land, there ruled a wise and kind king named Aryan. He had a daughter named Sophie, who was renowned throughout the land for her beauty, intelligence, and kindness. Sophie was not only stunning in appearance, but she also had a pure heart and a noble spirit that captivated everyone around her. Sophie had always been under strict protection from guards. Since her childhood, she was never allowed to visit the market alone, walk through the forest, or even talk to common people. Her father, the king, was always worried that something might happen to his only daughter. But Sophie had grown tired of this life. She longed to be free, to live like everyone else, and to experience the world as it truly was. One day, Sophie decided to escape the palace and live freely for a few days. In the middle of the night, while everyone was asleep, she and one of her servants, Maria, quietly left the palace, dressed in simple clothes. The night was cold, but Sophie felt light, as if she was breathing for the first time in her life. They quickly moved away from the palace and reached the city. The streets were empty, with only a few stray cats and guards patrolling in the distance. Sophie and Maria went to a small inn where no one recognized them. The next morning, Sophie walked through the market for the first time without guards. The colors, sounds, and smells of the market mesmerized her. As they were strolling through the market, a man named Damien, a lazy and reckless fellow, saw them. He was enchanted by Sophie's beauty. He quickly went to his friends who were nearby gambling. Excitedly, he shouted, "Get up, you fools! Get up! Today I found a treasure more valuable than all the money in the world." His friends looked at him in surprise. He continued, "I saw a girl whose beauty seems to come from heaven itself. We must have her." They set off and began to follow Sophie and Maria from a distance. Sophie decided to visit the forest to see the beauty of nature. She had always dreamed of experiencing freedom in the embrace of nature, and now she had a chance to make that dream come true. They headed toward the forest, unaware that they were being followed. Sophie and Maria walked slowly through the forest paths, passing through tall trees and green bushes. The sounds of birds and the flowing of a nearby river created a calming atmosphere. Damien and his friends, now certain that Sophie and Maria had fallen into their trap, stepped out from behind the trees and appeared in front of them. Sophie and Maria, caught off guard, quickly stepped back, but behind them were only rocks and tall trees. Damien, with an evil grin, said, "Did you think you could escape from us? This is the forest, and no one can save you here." Though frightened, Sophie tried to maintain her composure. She spoke firmly, "I am the daughter of the king. If you harm me, my father will never forgive you." The man mocked, "A king? There's no king here in the forest. We make the rules here." Sophie shouted with all her might, "Help! Please, someone help!" The man sneered, "Shout all you want, little girl. No one is here to hear you. The forest belongs to us now, and you are ours." They attacked Sophie and Maria savagely, dragged them deeper into the forest. Damien, with a threatening look, said to Sophie, Let's see what you've got, pretty girl." He embraced Sophie and kissed her lips. They continued to abuse Sophie and Maria until morning, creating a dark hell for Sophie, a night that would never leave her mind. When morning came, Sophie opened her eyes and saw Maria breathing heavily in the arms of the men. She realized what had happened and wanted to get up and run, but one of the men grabbed her and pulled her toward him, swapping places with Maria. The men kept Sophie and Maria in the forest for several days, abusing them as much as they could. Meanwhile, the king, deeply worried and furious about his daughter's disappearance, had the entire kingdom put on alert. He ordered every corner of his realm to be searched, promising a reward to anyone who provided information about Sophie and Maria. The king, who loved his daughter dearly, could not find peace and couldn't sleep at night. They searched every inch of the city, but there was no sign of Sophie. The king ordered, "Go search the mountains, the deserts, and the forest. We must find my daughter. If she's not found, go to the surrounding cities and search there. We must find her," he added. All the soldiers were on a quest to find the king's daughter, but they couldn't locate her daughter at this point. One of the soldiers searching the forest found a trace of Sophie and Maria. He immediately returned to the palace to report the news to the king. The king, relieved to hear that traces of Sophie had been found, decided to personally lead the soldiers into the forest. He was determined to rescue his daughter, even if he had to turn the entire forest upside down. The soldiers advanced carefully and cautiously into the heart of the forest, with the king looking ahead, his eyes filled with anxiety and hope. After hours of exhausting searching, a faint voice suddenly echoed through the trees. The king closed his eyes and listened carefully. Once again, the familiar voice drifted through the wind. "Help someone help," the king held his breath. "Sophie!" The king and his soldiers rushed toward the sound, and the king cried out with tears in his eyes, "Sophie! My daughter! We are here!" They reached Sophie and Maria among the trees. But the king was confronted with a scene that broke his heart. He saw his beloved daughter lying lifeless in the arms of several men, moaning in pain, and Maria, Sophie's loyal servant, lying beside her, struggling to breathe. The king shook with rage, his entire body trembling, and he shouted, "Seize them!" The soldiers attacked the men with a powerful shout. The criminals had no chance to escape. One by one, they fell to their knees, while the king, with tears in his eyes, threw his cloak over Sophie. He held her tightly, whispering as he gazed at his pale-faced daughter, "My daughter. I am here." The soldiers imprisoned the men, and the king returned to the palace with his daughter. Without regard for curious onlookers, the king took Sophie to his private chamber. He immediately ordered the palace doctor to attend to her and provide any care necessary. The doctor quickly entered and examined Sophie, while the king stood in a corner, his face filled with sorrow as he watched them. After the examination, the doctor said, "Your Majesty, the princess has not suffered serious physical harm and is in good health, but I hope that the emotional trauma she has endured will not affect her permanently and that she will recover her joyful spirit." Several days passed. Sophie, now feeling better, went to the palace hall and stood before the king. Her eyes still shimmered with pain and sorrow. In a quiet voice, she said, "Father, forgive me for making you worry. I should never have left the palace alone." The king, hearing these words, took a deep breath and responded with sorrow, "My daughter, it wasn't you who made the mistake. It is I who am to blame for creating a world for you that you wanted to escape from." He paused and then continued, "The men are in prison. I want you to decide their fate." Sophie thought for a moment. If she had been the only victim, perhaps she would have forgiven them. But Maria and her father, who had suffered so much, she raised her head, her voice firm as she spoke. "Father, they must be punished. Not just for me, but for all women who may fall victim to such cruelty." The king ordered the men to be handed over to the royal army to suffer the same fate they had imposed on the princess. The men were kept in the palace for several days, and after a while they were taken to the town square, where they were publicly executed in the most severe manner. Their bodies were thrown into the forest to become prey for the animals. After this event, the king never again restricted his daughter's freedom. Sophie lived peacefully in the palace until several months later, when she married a prince from a distant land. Together with her husband and Maria, she left the palace and began a new life, one in which she would never feel imprisoned again.